what you make sure to have done before you start your polishing on a shot. You know, what steps you need to finish before the polishing starts, and how do you personally go about to polish shots. Now that's going to be a very long answer for me because, but that's cool because here's what I always feel is that, you know, I've been teaching class 3 and class 4 at Animation Mentor for a long time, and 2 of my former students are here too. And what I see what happens is it's not in the polish stage, but it's in the stage right before it. It's in that blocking plus stage. And what I see is that not enough is put into blocking plus before polish. Now, and I know the mindset because, you know, I feel the same way, is that when I start working on a shot, I'm like, oh, I just want to make it move, and I'm going to do this, and look, and now it's in step mode. It looks really cool in step mode because it's going like this and everything, and now let's go in the spline, and what the heck happened? You know, it's like, have you had that happen where in step mode it looks so cool, and then you put it in spline, and you're like, that sucks. What happened? You know, and the thing that I feel that happens is that in that blocking plus phase is that you just don't have enough keyframes, because you know in step, if you work in step, that it changes over 1 frame, where actually it could be 8 frames. You know, and so we're seeing a different timing, a different spacing, and then when all those frames are there and you go into spline, then it becomes really apparent. Now, if you don't work in step mode, if you work in just spline mode, I feel like you're more layering, and to me, I know there's some people that can do it. There's a couple of animators at Pixar especially that they can do that really well. Most of us mortals can't. We have to see it. You know, it's almost like we have to be able to understand, okay, this is going to be an anticipation, I need to do this, instead of layering, like, okay, I'm going to do my body, now I'm going to do my arm, now I'm going to, you know, like that. I think what has to happen is in that blocking stage, you start thinking, and you really, and I break it down. I mean, I go into steps where, like, right after my blocking, my first blocking, which is basically storytelling poses, not everything that's in there. I tell my students, I say, if it doesn't tell the story, then don't put it in blocking. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to tell a story, you're not going to say, a guy takes 1 step, then another step, then another, and then he pulls a step back, and then he prepares, and he starts to lift out, he starts to go down, and then he gets down to lift up the box, and then he picks it up halfway, and then he goes back up, and then he starts to push it, and then he finishes the push. That's not a story. A story is a guy walks in, picks up a box, and throws it. You know, so that's the thing. It's like, so those are my storytelling poses. Those are the poses that that first pass when I go through, I do that. And what this does is now I'm like building my foundation. You know, it's like construction. You don't start painting walls until you put them up. Now you got to put a foundation first. You got to put the 2x4s up, then you got to put the walls up, then you got to paint it. You know, and so that's the way I look at it too. And so after that phase, then we go into the blocking plus. I mean, there's some other phases, other steps that can go in there. But in blocking plus, I'll start thinking about my anticipation. I'll start thinking about my transitions. And in my transitions, I'm thinking of everything. I'm thinking of spacing. I'm thinking of arcs. I'm thinking of drag and overlap when I'm doing my individual pose. You know, so like when I do my main breakdown, I start thinking, okay, I'm going to drag the head when I go like this. And so my breakdown is going to be my body's like this, my head's dragging back, like that. So I put all of that into that blocking plus, into step mode. And so if you look at my animation, it's like I have a key almost every other frame. Most of it is like every 4 frames, but almost every other frame. And so when I go into polish, it looks pretty similar. You know, now when I do go into polish, though, I think I have a very methodical approach to it, and this is the hardest thing, is that if you're in the splines and everything, do you think of you know, when you first watch your animation, you're like, okay, the first time, and you're writing down notes. Remember I was talking earlier about planning. I'll write down notes, but I bet you this is what happens to most of you. If you'll write down a note and you'll say, all right, cool, I'm going to get back into I'm going to get back in here, and all right, I'm going to make this change. I'm going to make this, all right, so I made his head move, all right, now I did that. All right, let's render, let's see what it looks like to make a change. What happens if you do that, though? You know, when you do that, you go like this. You go, oh, I didn't know the leg did that. Oh man, let me write that. Oh, and look, his arm on frame 50. What's going on there? I didn't see that. So you took one thing off, and you just added two more. And then if you do that again, you're never going to finish the list. You know, so that's what I call noodling. You know, I feel like you don't really know what you're looking for. And so in the polish pass, what I like to do is, how many times does an audience see your shot? You know, how many times do they see it? One time, right? And they don't see it by itself. You know, they see other shots around it, right? So what I like to do is, at the very first time, all right, I put it in the splines. I want to, and the other thing is too, I make sure that my feet aren't sliding before I do that. But I'll put it in the splines, and I'll make a render, and I'll make sure it doesn't loop. And I'll literally scoot back and look at it from back here, because like as a director, I literally like to take a step back to look at the bigger picture. And so I'll literally scoot back, look at it one time, and see if there's anything that bumps me, because I'm looking at it from an audience perspective. Now, I said an audience perspective, not an animator's perspective. And this is very important, because as an animator, you're going to say, oh man, the spacing looked bad, and the timing was terrible, and oh man, that pose, and oh, everything moved at the same time. You got to look at it the first time not as an animator, but as an audience. And what you do is you just look at it for entertainment value and say, is there anything that bumps me, something that doesn't work as an audience member? And what that can be is something as easy as, you know, an arm kind of making a weird move, or like with IK, when IK pulls away. So anything that's literally a mistake. Or sometimes you might even see the head go, oh, you know, like that. So I'll write that down. So there might not be any of that. There might be a lot of, oh man, my spacing, but from an audience perspective. But I'll still write that down as a bump. Then I'll move in closer, literally, and loop it. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for very specific things. Okay, and this is the part that I think when you're doing polish, I think if you can do this, because here's what happens, I know for myself, is I'm always thinking, my performance sucks, I need to make this better, my animation looks terrible, how am I going to do this? And that's all in my head when I'm looking at it, instead of saying, you know what, take that fear, take that doubt out of your mind, and when you look at it, you're gonna say, okay, I'm only going to look at spacing. I'm only going to look at drag and overlap. I'm only going to look at arcs. Man, and if you can stay focused like that, when you put better, what's going to happen? You're going to put better drag. You're going to put better spacing. You're going to put better overlap. You're going to put better arcs. So that's going to make your animation better. So you're automatically going to do that. So what I like to tell students is, like, when you do that, get so focused that you're going to look at it about 10 times. You're going to loop it through about 10 times. But you're only looking at arcs is the first thing, because that's the easiest, right? Because we can see if it's arc, you know, like the character's nose, or if the arm or anything like that. You can see if it's an arc. You can see if it goes like that, or if it's, you know, not quite the arc that you want. And so I'll go through and say, oh, something's weird with my body there. All right, what frame is that? All right, 40 to 45. Check arm. You know, so I'll do that, and I'll look through. Like I said, I'll look through it about 10 times. And then after I do that 10 to maybe 15 times, then I'll look and say spacing. Now, when I'm first looking through like arcs, there might be something, and it's going to jump in your head, because I mean, we're all, I like to call us shiny object people. You know, that we're always like, hey, what, you know, it's raining today, and then what are we talking about? You know, so this is what's going to happen, is that you're going to watch your animation, and you're going to say, oh man, that spacing there is, what's that? And you literally have to, whoa, hold on, only looking at arcs, because I'm going to come back to it. But if you just focus on that, you'll start to see it better, and not just in your polish, but in your next shot in Blocking Plus, because now you're training your eye. And so I like to look at this as not only making this shot better, but it's making me better, and it's going to make my next shots better, because I'm not going to make same mistakes. I'm going to say, oh, wait a minute, I remember that arc that didn't work there, and it's because I didn't put it in my Blocking Plus, so you're going to put it in there at that time. And so I look at my arcs first, and then I go through and look at my spacing. And my spacing, what I look at is it even? You know, I think that when we say computer animation, like I give this note a lot, is it looks like computer animation. And what I mean by that, it looks like the computer animated it. And the computer, as you know, is a terrible animator. You know, I mean, it's great at ones and zeros, but at keyframes, computer, and I know some producers say, well, just hit the animate button. Yeah, wish. We have to do everything. We've got to think of everything. So it's terrible at saying, like, if I have a keyframe here and a keyframe here, it's just going to go like that. It's going to do basically a straight line. Here's my key, here's my next key. So I look at things, does it have an even spacing? Does it go slow and then fast? Or does it go fast and then slow? And so I look at that and try to make sure that I focus on that. So even with my head, okay, I got a nice arc, but it feels very even. All right, so I note that down. I start writing more as I go, okay, at this. Now I've got about 6 or 7 notes, whatever, but I'm only looking at spacing. Then the next thing that I look at right after that is very similar to spacing, but I like to call it speeds. And I had a director at Disney. This guy's awesome, and it's weird though. He had emphysema and smoked, and so his voice really rough. That's how he kind of was. And it was great because he said one time with my animation, he goes, I think you got to have different speeds. You got to have speeds. And I was like, and I thought of the movie Rocky 2 or Rocky 3 when Burgess Meredith was yelling at Rocky when Rocky couldn't catch the chicken. Like, no, we got speed. I mean, it sounded just like it. I'm like, what are you talking about? But what he meant was everything happens at the same time. That's bad. You don't want everything to happen at the same time. You want it to be like, if I'm just going to even just do a little, like a look here, see how my arms are going to come at a different speed, like that. And so my body might get there before, and then my head, and then my arms, and then even my fingers. So everything's going to be at a different speed. So I look at this. Does a keyframe look like does the animation look like it goes from one keyframe to the next? Like everything hits at the same time. And I'm not talking about offsets. I'm not talking about going into the graph editor and making offset. I'm talking about going into your in-betweens. Because here's where your in-betweens would be. It's here, and then you do your breakdown. It might be like here. And then you have another key here and another key here. And so your animation would look like that. So I look at speeds. I go through my entire process looking at speeds. And so I might write down a couple more as I go. It looks like the head and the arm hit at the same time there. I want to go like that. I want things to make it feel like it's happening at different times. So I write that down. And then the last thing that I write down, and these are all kind of close, but not exactly. The last thing I look at is drag and overlap. And I got to tell you, I think that's a secret to when someone says your animation doesn't have any weight to it. What that means is that your body parts don't feel like there's any weight to it. Like when I see a head even kind of go like this, it's like, no, wait a minute, this thing weighs 8 pounds. So when I turn, first of all, it doesn't, my neck's strong, but it's not that strong. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of looseness to it, and so there's going to be a little bit of a drag to it. My hand, if I'm going to lift it up, it's going to have some drag to it. So I've got, my arm is pulling it up, but you can see, and even my fingers have a little bit of drag. If I go like this, or if I go like that, I now have put weight on my fingers. Now they actually feel like they weigh something instead of like that. So I look at that entire piece. I look through the piece just for drag and overlap. So I write all those down. All right, and now I've got a list of, it might be 50. It might be 50 or something like that. Then I'll go through, and this is the hardest part. The most difficult part of this is this, because I said a little bit about it earlier, is that, okay, so we've got all of our notes, and we've looked at it probably 50 times, right? And the audience only looks at it one time, right? So we picked it apart pretty good. So now we go through the notes, and I'm huge on lists, and I like, well, here's my list from yesterday, so there's a bunch there, and I love crossing things off. And so I'll go through, all right, let's fix that little bump. All right, cool, yeah, woohoo, I got something done. And like I said, render it right away, because you're going to add more stuff. So here's the hardest thing. And this actually works because my students have all done this, is do everything on your list before doing a single playback. That's hard. Because what happens? You're like, well, wait a minute, I want to make sure that this works, right? It's like, but I've been scrubbing through. I'm going to see. Try not to do it, because here's what's going to happen. Chances are a lot of your notes are pretty similar. And if you go through and say fixed arm on frame 45 because of drag or whatever, and you do the drag, and then there might be a spacing that's in the same thing, you fix all of that, and then you do a playback, what's going to happen is that you've eliminated notes. Because there's going to be probably some notes that you're going to have that if you looked at it one time, you know, if you change one thing and then looked at it, you're probably going to have a note. But if you fix a lot of things around it, even though the problem still maybe minutely might be there, but it's not going to bump you because you fixed something else. And so now it actually it eliminates a lot of notes that way. You know, so does that kind of make sense? Is like, because if you start to you know, like I said, like say the arm thing. If you have an arm here that's doing this, and man, the spacing's even, it looks like this. Spacing's even, and there's no drag, there's no overlap. So when I go through and I change my spacing, if I just change my spacing, I might say, oh man, now there needs to be an anticipation. The anticipation wasn't big enough. But if I go through and I change my spacing and I put a little bit of drag on it, looks like that, I probably will never even think about the anticipation because it looks good. Because there wasn't really a problem there. Okay? And so that really helps a lot. It's very difficult, I know, because you want to see what it looks like. But I think that if you can do that, that's going to help a ton. You know, so that was a really long answer, right, for just the polish.
That was a great answer. Yeah, nice.
So I'm gonna go to another question that Kyle had.